welcome everyone for this webinar on the impact of the US elections on the EU-UK relations. We are with Next EU-UK, which is a project for which I'm principal investigator on the future of EU-UK relations. This project is based at the Jean Monnet Centre of Excellence, the Centre for European Research at Queen Mary University of London, and I'm director of that centre. We are a platform that enables academic and policymakers exchange on the future of EU-UK relations. We publish policy briefs, working papers. We have a blog that I encourage you all to follow. And we also welcome contributions from different horizons and experts. Yes, we have different activities targeting students, policymakers with roundtables, and we have this live lecture series. Well, it was supposed to be physical, but we have moved it online. And today I'm very, very pleased to welcome three leading experts in the field. I'm welcoming first Alexandra de Hoop Scheffer. She's from the German Marshall Fund of the United States, based at the Paris office and Director of Research and Transatlantic Security. You have worked in the past, I think, extensively as well for the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for the French Ministry of Defense, but also at the UN Department of Peacekeeping Operations. So you have an extensive experience in geopolitics, international relations, but more specifically on transatlantic relations and defense. And then we have Professor Christian Lequesne from Sciences Po Paris. Hello. You are an expert also of, of foreign policy, foreign ministries, and of European politics as well. I'm also welcoming my colleague from Queen Mary University of London, Richard Johnson, your lecturer in US politics and policy. You have, I think, a book upcoming with Bristol University Press next year in May 2021 on US foreign policy, domestic roots and international impact. But you are also a specialist of the racial politics of in the US and of the Obama administration especially, and I think the Trump administration as well. And I think you're also able to give us your thoughts on what will be the impact on Brexit. So when we started this debate, we had a lot of questions in mind. What will be the impact? Raising question, of course, on maybe restoring, I think, trust, mutual respect between the US and the EU from a transatlantic relationship perspective. I would like to turn to you, Alexandra, to have your thoughts a little bit on that first aspect of transatlantic relationship, maybe also from a security and NATO perspective, because if I have followed carefully, I think President Macron has a different perspective than the German, the German defense minister on what steps should happen over the future of the security relationship. And I was wondering if we might see old tensions between Atlanticism over NATO also appearing, but the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. And by definition, the French always have a different perspective compared to our European counterparts. But no, I'm very happy to be with you and to share this panel with both Christian and Richard. And thank you for organizing this event. I was really thrilled to be able to participate. So in reference to your question on the transatlantic relationship, and I liked the way you introduced it also around, the question of trust, because I think if you don't trust one another, you cannot really work on what we would call a positive agenda for transatlantic cooperation. Basically, I'm sitting here in Paris. I've been working in the transatlantic field for almost 15 years now. I can tell you that the mood here in France is one that I would describe as cautiously optimistic, for, I would say, three reasons. One is because optimistic, obviously, there is a familiarity with Biden and his team. I mean, virtually everybody, who will get into his administration will have served under the Obama administration. Biden is a well-known political leader, a well-known expert also in international relations, and his experience has been profoundly shaped by the Cold War era and the importance of shared values and of the transatlantic relationship. And I would say much more than Barack Obama himself. To me, Barack Obama was the first post-European American president. His world vision was not shaped by transatlantic relationships nor Europe, but was much more shaped by the Asia Pacific, as we have seen. So there is a sort of return, or what I would call a pivot to Europe, that is absolutely obvious with the arrival of Biden at the White House, because this is just part of his DNA, and it's part of the DNA of his advisors. When you look at, the people advising him on European strategic affairs, Tony Blinken, who will probably be his national security advisor, Michel Flournoy, his Secretary of Defense, Susan Rice, maybe his Secretary of State, my former colleague Judy Smith, who's been advising him on Asia, NATO, and Europe as well. All of these people share the same appetite to restore US leadership and to repair the transatlantic relationship. So that to me is what kind of fuels this optimism that you can see on this side of the Atlantic in Europe and also in Paris. There is obviously, I would say, a more prudent reaction that you can feel here in Paris, precisely for the reason that Sarah, you underlined in your introduction. First, I would say because the world has changed. The world has profoundly changed these last 4 years. Obviously, in big part because of Trump's disruptive policies on the international scene and disruptiveness within the transatlantic relationship, but also because other powers have increased their influence. Look at China within multilateral organizations or through its Belt and Road initiatives, Turkey in the East Mediterranean, Russia on the eastern flank, and much more broadly. I mean, Russia has been increasing its influence also in the Middle East, but also in Africa. So the world is different. And what is really interesting is to see that within the Biden team, there is a big debate between those who would want to get back to the Obama era, a more sort of classic kind of US leadership, and others, I would say maybe the younger generation of advisors like Jake Sullivan, who has been a key advisor throughout the Biden campaign, who are pushing to update these policies or these, sort of diplomatic formulas that have already been implemented under previous Democrat administration, and saying, wait a second, we cannot get back to normal. We need to update our lenses, and we need to maybe reinvent the way we do foreign policy and reinvent the way we deal with challenges like China, Russia, climate change, and the technological sovereignty issues that we share here as well with the Americans. And finally, something that is very specific here in the French debate, and as you rightly said, Sarah, that is not obviously shared in Berlin, at least not to the extent that it is here in France, that is even less shared when you go eastwards, Warsaw, for example, where our think tank has an office. The debate is very different as well. When it comes to defining our relationship with Washington, within NATO, and the way we understand the concept of European sovereignty or European strategic autonomy. And now what's really interesting with the French attitude is that there is a sort of feeling that Donald Trump was a lesson for Europe, and that we need to take that as something that should incentivize Europeans to become less reliant on a Washington that is less and less predictable. It's not just Trump that was unpredictable, but in the French debate, we internalize the idea that it is the US international commitments that might become more and more unpredictable. Just looking at what Trump did to get out of the Paris climate agreement, of the Iran nuclear deal, withdrawing from the World Health Organization, how easy it is for an American president to just dismantle all of these so-called presidential orders or executive orders that was signed by his predecessor. And so the kind of trust that you mentioned in your introduction is quite difficult actually to put again in the relationship with Washington, because what tells you that 4 years from now you will maybe have a president looking much more like Trump again and saying, no way, we are withdrawing from this or that agreement. And so that's why, and I will conclude with that, at the core of the French debate here and belief is that we need as Europeans to be much more strategic about our priorities, about our interests, to look at that in the longer term and to look at that beyond, I would say, the president that sits in the White House. And the concept of European strategic autonomy is precisely that, is how do we Europeans become more able and capable to defend our interests and potentially to be able to act, including militarily, in our neighborhoods, but mostly southward in the Mediterranean, in the Middle East, in Africa, in potential scenarios where neither the United States will say, sorry, this is not our vital interest, this is a European affair, it's your thing to do. And Libya 2011 was to a big extent a precursor of that. But there will also be scenarios when NATO, the Atlantic Alliance, is probably not the appropriate framework either because of its nature of military alliance. And so in these cases, the only solution is for Europeans to be able to act together. And so that's exactly, I would say, the goal of this strategic autonomy or strategic sovereignty, is to think of how do we Europeans cooperate better together, anticipate these scenarios. And the very last sentence of conclusion, I would basically say the future of the transatlantic relationship today relies much more on us, Europeans, and what we can do more together rather than on Washington. And that's something that we need to internalize and to come in January to the Biden administration with a much more coherent sense of what we want and of the issues on which we want to work with the new White House. And that will be extremely well welcomed by the Biden team.
Well, thank you very much, Alexandra, for this really, I think positive and encouraging overview of how Europeans also should behave vis-a-vis the US, work on this strategic autonomy, but as you say, also geopolitically to really say what Europeans want and what kind of priorities they have. I see different opportunities and difficulties in doing that. For instance, with WHO, we see that Europeans have, stepped in after the US left the organization, and I think they're seizing the opportunity. But on the other hand, if we look at the trends, by 2030, I think the EU economic future looks a little bit more difficult. As you say, the world is changing very fast. And we know that by 2050, only Germany will remain one of the largest economies compared to the world's 8 largest economies at present. 4 are Europeans nowadays, but this will change by 2050 with only Germany. So I would like now to turn a little bit to Christian Lequesne, and with this very positive note that Alexandra raised, I think, how do you think Europeans can seize the moment? What kind of leadership is needed from the European side? And do you foresee any tensions internally? And of course, I have in mind the high degree of adaptability of Europe vis-a-vis the pandemic with the European Recovery Fund, which is also now we've learned just blocked by some Eastern European countries. So I would like maybe to have your opinion on that. And you have 10 minutes. And before giving you the floor, just to remind the audience to stay online, because we will have a Q&A and you will be able at the end of the interventions of all our experts to ask your questions as well. So please be patient. Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And let me start saying how happy I am to exchange with Richard and Alexandra. I was just listening to Alexandra, and I was thinking about one thing. I have always one problem with Alexandra, is that I always agree with her. That's my that's the difficulty in a debate like this. So let me start with the perception of the change in Europe. Definitely, I think we can expect a difference in the style. I mean, we will go back to a more diplomatic style, and I think the time where the President of the United States is using Twitters to send insults to European capitals is probably over. I mean, for 4 years, Mr. Biden is not going to use this kind of communication, but the conflict of interest will always be there, and I don't think it's because we have Biden we will not have a conflict of interest on very classic dossiers. Of course, the trade surplus that will remain. It's linked also to the way we are dealing with China, the burden sharing for NATO. This is also a recurrent dossier which will remain. But I'm very sensitive to the argument saying, well, beyond Trump, what about a structural change also in the American foreign policy regarding Europe? I don't think the change started with Trump, probably, and I very much agree that they started with Obama. The last U.S. president who had the classic European orientation was probably George W. Bush, and this is why he was so loved and liked in Central Europe, for instance, because he was exactly what the elites, foreign policy elites in Central Europe expected, speaking all the time about security guarantee, umbrella, etc., etc. But this time is over, and I'm not sure that it will come back with the new Democrat administration. The other thing I would like to say is that Biden, of course, won the election, but it's a very small victory, right? And Trumpism is still there, and there is a huge transformation of the Republican Party in the US, and we don't know whose kind of candidate could come in 2024, but we can have another Trump or another, well, guy maybe more sophisticated in the communication, but having exactly the same foreign policy concern. So this is something we shall keep in mind. It's not because we have Biden that it means that we are back to normality forever in the relationship with the United States. I think a difference, however, in having Biden is that the United States, will not express any more opposition in principle to European integration, and that was specific to Trump. He supported Brexit and disintegration. He had the terrible words against the EU. Speaking recently, he said that in trade affairs, the EU is even worse than China, and maybe more important for the cohesion. And here I very much agree with what has been said by Alexandra. He was a support to the populist leaders in Europe, sometimes called the mini Trumps. Right? We have some mini Trumps in Hungary, in Poland, in Slovenia. So those people, now they could not use the argument that they have the support of the leader of the First Nation in the world to promote the same ideas. But it does not mean that we will move towards an easier coordination for foreign policy. And what has been said by Alexandra again is very important. If we want to be taken seriously by the Biden administration, we have to show that we have a form of unity, that we have a form of cohesion. And here I see some strange signs. Just after the announcement of the election, we got a paper from the German Ministry of Defense, Mrs. Kramp-Karrenbauer, in the magazine Politico, where she said that, thinking about strategic autonomy is just an illusion for the Europeans. Well, this is exactly the kind of things which shows that, the Europeans are not united to move towards, responsibility in their security. So I think this kind of things, of course, are not positive signs. Mrs. Kramp-Karrenbauer wants to be very orthodox for the German Christian Democrats electorate, but she probably did not measure the very negative effects of what she said. And the only way is trying to take our responsibility and think about moving towards EU actor in foreign policy. But this is very difficult, I think, for also one structural point. When we had the time of the transatlantic relations during the Cold War, well, of course, we share the values, but those who attend, the French were a bit different, they also accepted a form of hegemony coming from one of the partners, and this partners was the United States. It was part of the deal on the international liberal order. If the Europeans want to create their European security order, maybe they'll have to accept also one or two forms of leadership or hegemony. And this is exactly what is not possible in Europe, because Europe has been created, has been built, well, against the very idea of hegemony or leadership coming from some of its members. So it's a structural limit to what the Europeans are doing. And if Mr. Macron thinks that well, he can just move forward saying, well, France is going to take the lead, etc. Well, I think this analysis is not probably so realistic, because nobody wants to have leaders. Nobody wants to have second and first class members in the EU. Everybody wants to be on the same line, and this is a structural difficulty for moving forward in the sector of foreign and security policy. So just to finish, we have the impression regarding China that in Washington DC, some of the Democrats, of the advisors around Biden, just considered that they need to have an utilitarian relationship with Europe, and they have to use Europe as much as possible vis-a-vis China. This is also an excellent incentive for the Europeans to think about their own strategic policy vis-a-vis China. So what is going on in Washington DC is an invitation for the Europeans not only to rethink the way they want to behave vis-a-vis the United States, but also the way they want to behave vis-a-vis other powers in the world, and especially the People's Republic of China. So I'm stopping here, Sarah.
Sorry, thank you very much, Christian. And again, raising points about internal tensions, the issue of hegemony, and how Europeans want to rethink their relationship with the US. And if I may just complement a little bit the conversation, it's interesting to see also that Europe is actually tough sometimes on trade, but also, for instance, on European standards in the digital world. And we see there are lots of tensions between the US and Europe on regulatory standards. Yes, I think you all know that in July, the European Union's top court invalidated the privacy shield transatlantic data flows deal because of fears of US surveillance. So we do have differences of views. And I just wanted to add this point as well to complement the geopolitical analysis we had from both Christian and Alexandra. I also want now to turn to Richard, and I think the concept of unity that you raised, Christian, is actually quite useful for my transition towards Richard, because I think Europeans have been quite united when it comes to Brexit. And I think my first question to you, I know you have two sides of expertise I've asked you to comment on and to bring to the debate, but is a little bit to think about the impact of the US election on Brexit and future of maybe EU-UK relations. I don't know if the resignation of Dominic Cummings is directly linked, but I would be happy to have your comments on that. And maybe later on, I know that your expertise is also on, let's say, more in domestic politics of the US. As Christian said, Trumpism is still there in the US. It hasn't disappeared. You have a lot of tensions, and I'm sure you have a lot of insights to share with us on that. And just before you take the floor, because you will have about, again, 10 minutes to speak, I just want to ask the 86 participants in the audience to maybe prepare their questions and to start also to type it in so that we can select a few for the Q&A. But Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you for inviting me here. And I just want to compliment my other panelists, Alexandra and Christian, because there's a lot that they've raised to agree with. And I think, though, I'm going to just take a slightly different orientation, as Sarah's guided, by thinking about the domestic US factors and how it relates to the UK and the UK-EU relationship. So I'm going to begin by talking about reflecting on the presidential election itself, what it means, what the result means for what a Biden administration can achieve. Then I want to talk about what that means for the so-called special relationship, the UK and US, and then I want to talk about what it means for the UK EU relationship. So first of all, just to reflect on the US presidential election results. This was a close election, and what do I mean by that? Because on certain metrics, it doesn't look close. Biden won an overwhelming popular vote majority. It looks like he'll have won more than 5 million more votes than Donald Trump. He won the same number of electoral college votes as Donald Trump 4 years ago. But Biden's electoral college majority rests on a much smaller number of votes in those key states. About 45,000 votes are the margin by which Joe Biden's electoral college majority rests upon. And so that's just to say that actually, if a few things had been slightly different in this election, we might have seen a different outcome. And therefore, I think the sort of building on what's been said before about the notions of whether Trumpism has been vanquished or not, I think we have to be very cautious about that view, because I think that there's still a great deal of electoral power but behind Trump and much of what he stands for in the United States. Trump increased his support relative to 4 years ago. Biden's victory is built on a consolidation of the anti-Trump vote, which was more fragmented with third-party candidates last time. So it was that unity that helped Biden win the election. What's also, I think, important about the election results is to think about the legislature and how that might impair Biden's ability to achieve his policy agenda. It's not certain, but it looks probable that he'll lack a Democratic Party majority in the United States Senate, which would constrain him in a number of ways. It would constrain, first of all, the appointments that he could make, including ambassadorial appointments, including who he can put in his cabinet. This makes the Republican Party potentially the gatekeepers for the diplomatic corps of the United States, and who Biden, for example, can make his Secretary of State. And I think that's worth keeping in mind. It also constrains his legislative agenda and really his ability to pass laws affecting immigration reform, climate change, repealing the Trump tax cut, and so on. A lot of that looks like it might be dead on arrival if the Republicans do, in fact, hold the Senate. And of course, many presidents have faced similar constraints on their ability to govern. And we have seen a phenomenon sometimes called the two presidencies thesis, where presidents then redirect their focus to foreign affairs because they are understood to be less constrained in foreign policy matters than in domestic policy matters. And usually this is something that happens often towards the end of a president's tenure. And that's, you know, partly a reflection of the fact that Biden could be, if he loses the Senate, could be the first president not to have control of the Senate in his first 100 days since George H.W. Bush in 1989. Of course, George H.W. Bush was another president who focused a great deal on foreign affairs in his presidency. So I think we could see a foreign policy oriented first term Biden administration, which would set him apart from even the Obama administration, which focused a great deal more on domestic affairs in its first few years in office. I think that means that we'll see a number of immediate changes that Biden can achieve at the executive level. And that'll be on some of the points that have been mentioned before about the Paris Climate Accords, the Iran nuclear deal, the United States' membership of the WHO. I think re-establishing US support for some other UN agencies, which Trump has walked back on. So how does that then build into the UK-US relationship? Well, I think actually stylistically we'll see obviously a great difference between Trump and Biden, but actually many of the main pillars of the UK-US relationship largely weathered the Trump presidency. You know, for all of Donald Trump's critiques, NATO has survived. The Five Eyes security relationship has survived. The economic relationship between the US and the UK has survived. And I think that in many ways, the Biden presidency will attempt to push forward with strengthening these ties. You know, the US and the UK do have certain special dynamics. The US is the UK's single greatest country export market, and the UK is the United States' single top tourist and educational destination outside of North America. But yes, there is going to be a difference in style between these presidents. Much has been made of Joe Biden's Irish heritage. Biden himself alludes to it. I think there's a risk at reading too much into that, though. For one thing, that talking about being Irish in America actually carries certain domestic political connotations, which can be easily missed, about a signaling about actually a class position in America, which we don't necessarily pick up on. But when Joe Biden, for example, said to this BBC reporter the other week, "I'm Irish," you know, it was partly a joke, but it's also, to say one's Irish is almost a signal I'm an ordinary guy. So I think we need to be careful about reading too much into that. You know, Trump, you know, was the son of a British immigrant to America and so on, and he has property in the UK, and you can make a great deal about that. But in terms of what that meant concretely for the US-UK relationship, it's not terribly clear. I think obviously what a clear reorientation will be is that Biden will be less hostile, actively hostile to the European Union in his rhetoric. Again, what that means substantively might be uncertain. You know, there are ongoing trade disputes between the EU and the US, for example, with Boeing and Airbus, which are not going to disappear just because Biden is president. So I think that will be a change. But I think just to sort of wrap it up here, I think what we might see that might be different for the UK-EU trade deal is that the Trump presidency offered the UK government a sort of an escape route, where if a deal couldn't be reached between the EU and the UK, there was a US deal in theory waiting in the wings. And Biden, I think, has made it clear that it's not. I actually think that could make an UK-EU deal more likely than less. And actually, this could be a way of Biden demonstrating his relevance on the foreign policy stage by sort of helping to claim credit for driving the UK and the EU to a deal, and then a subsequent deal between the UK and the US. So I'll leave it there and look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much. And you have actually, by elaborating on actually how positive could be this election for the EU-UK deal, you have answered actually questions in the chat. So without further ado, I will go and select a few questions which have been coming through. And maybe, we will see in which order. I will take round of questions. So the first one is actually, is there anything Trump might do between now and leaving office that could inflict damage upon US-EU relations? Indeed, there are still a couple of months, a couple of weeks. Yes, and another interesting question from Aida as well is, how do you picture the role of Great Britain in the transatlantic relationship following Brexit? what strengths will the UK maintain? Perhaps she's actually directing that question to all of you. And yeah, there was an interesting question as well, I think, following a little bit the discussion on populism, asking, and this is an anonymous attendee, do you think that with Biden as president-elect, it will help center-left Europeans to push back against far-right movements? So maybe I could direct this last question first to Christian. I will ask the question about how do you picture the role of Great Britain in transatlantic relationship following Brexit, possibly to Alexandra and Richard, but feel all comfortable to answer any question. And maybe Richard, do you want to take the question on what could be the damage of the next coming weeks that Trump can still do on upon the US-European relations? And of course, Alexandra and Christian, feel free to complement. So I would go in the reverse order, maybe Richard, Christian, Alexandra, or is that okay? And then I will take another round of questions.
Yeah, so I'll answer Mark's question on what Trump can still do. I mean, it's one of the amazing things of the US system that, you know, there is a 2.5 month period between the election and the installation of the new administration. And normally that time is meant to be used for a transition of power, where there's a great deal of sharing of information. Biden is meant to receive the president's security briefings and so on, and the sort of the changing of the guard, the different appointees and prospective appointees are meant to meet with each other and swap information. Trump has made it clear he's not interested in that at all. He's even blocked Biden from receiving the security briefings. And so what that means is that if this carries on to mid-January, Biden's administration could be less well prepared than they might otherwise be including on security and foreign policy matters. Now, I would say a caveat to that is that Biden, of course, comes with an enormous amount of experience, both executive experience as vice president, but also foreign policy experience as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee when he's a United States senator. So he's received a lot of the background information before. He's not coming to this as a neophyte, and I think that's important. Trump can do a lot of other things if he wishes. He retains the full power of his office. He will retain Senate control. Trump can impose tariffs if he wants to impose tariffs, if he wants to escalate a tariff war with the EU. And I know additional tariffs were imposed on US goods coming to the EU earlier this month. Trump could certainly escalate that further. He, remains commander-in-chief, and I'm not suggesting that he has any intentions of using that power, but who knows? And if Trump wanted to flex a final hurrah, he could direct US military action, goodness knows where, and that could throw up all sorts of problems for his successor. So it depends, I suppose, also how destructive or helpful Trump wishes to be, but certainly at the moment, he's not really giving very strong signals of wanting to be very helpful.
Okay, thank you very much. Christian, do you have any reaction? And maybe the question also on will the election actually help center-left Europeans to push back against far-right movements, you think, in Europe?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I think it's not because Trump is over for 4 years that it's the end of populism in the Western world. And saying the Western world, I'm insisting on the fact that the phenomenon of far-right populism is a phenomenon which impacts, well, all the Western countries. And this is we need to have a sociological approach of that. Probably the first explanation is, well, for 30 years now, the globalization has totally changed the relationship to employment and to professional qualifications. So you have everywhere part of the population considering that they are the losers of this change. And also linked to globalization, you have the cultural dimension. We have more and more cultural diversity, more and more migration flows, and this is also bringing a reaction in part of the population, which is an identity reaction to this kind of change. So, and we have them everywhere. And I think one of the problem of the social democrats and or the center left, as it is put in the question, is that they do not have the monopoly anymore of the discourse on social policy. It's a bit different in the UK, because in the UK liberalism is very much embedded in the common sense. So you don't have in a Farage party, for instance, this very strong social discourse, or a discourse about social conservative. It's the case in most of the far right continental parties. They control now the discourse of the welfare state. And if you look at the kind of electorate they get, well, they have the modest part of the population, the blue-collar workers. So this is a big challenge for the center left, and I think the center left doesn't know how to find a new ideology or a new discourse to fight this move, this transition. In France, for instance, we have very good studies done by specialists of electoral sociology on the move of the electorate from the Socialist Party, especially in northern France, to Le Pen's party. Quite impressive in the region of Lille or the region of Calais, for instance, in the northern part of the country. If I may just say one word about the special relationship. Of course, the special relationship is, as the IR specialist would say, well, as constructivists would say, it's socially constructed, right? And I always had the impression that this notion was more important for the British elites than it was for the American elites. And sometimes there is an illusion in Great Britain about the importance of this special relationship for the Americans themselves. But I got the impression that for Biden and for his administration, I don't know what Alexandra will say, but it's probably easier to deal with a European Union which has one voice than dealing with separate capitals. And this is what the Brexiters have not understood, I guess, in putting in the debate, well, you know, this very big deal with the United States, etc. Well, Great Britain is relatively small, right? Like France is small for the United States. It's better to have the EU as a partner. So I'm a bit struck about that, because it's part of the rhetoric, right? But every country has can I say that? Socially construct rhetoric on something, right? In the UK, it's a special relationship. In France, it's a Franco-German relationship. It's part of our rhetoric. Sometimes I consider that it's a bit an illusion, but I stop here.
Thank you, Christian, and raising this point about narratives in national narratives as well, and their relevance for foreign policy. Alexandra, if you would like to react to Christian, but also you had this question about once Brexit happens, what will be the role of the UK in a transatlantic relationship, and what strengths do you think the UK will maintain? I think this question was also for you. And then I will take another round of questions. We have a lot coming in.
Sure. So on the UK question, I think there is this false idea that the Biden administration will, focus primarily on Paris and Berlin rather than London, since the UK can no longer serve as this so-called, bridge between the US and the EU. But Biden's advisors have been very clear that Biden as president will want to nurture all of these relationships, and those with Brussels directly too. So it's not a matter of one more than the other. To summarize, I would basically say we will be transitioning from no special relationships under Trump to several special relationships under Biden. Just to take what we call the big freeze, the UK basically is the special relationship par excellence, as we say, on trade, on security and defense. I mean, when you look at the common priorities shared by Johnson and Biden, there is a huge list: the fight against climate change, a desire for the UN-backed Iran nuclear deal, the NATO alliance to be bolstered. I mean, there is a huge list where, of course, the United States and the UK will be working extremely closely together. France, from a Washington perspective, is seen as a crucial ally, especially in counterterrorism, in what France does in the Sahel, in security and defense, and pushing for stronger European defense capabilities. And then you have Germany. I mean, you all remember how Obama saw Germany as his main interlocutor within the EU, especially after the crisis, the financial economic crisis of 2008. And there again, and the signals that you have from the Biden's advisors is that one of Biden's very first travel abroad will be in Europe, and more precisely in Berlin, and make a big speech about the importance of sharing these common values and transatlantic values, specifically with Germany. But Germany is also in the focus of the Biden administration because of China and because of the energy issues as well, Nord Stream 2, etc. So there will be points of tensions, point of negotiations, but a very large array of topics of cooperation in these several special relationships. The last question I wanted to tackle in 1 second is the transition and Trump and what he could do. There is a big dose of concern regarding what he could do as commander-in-chief in terms of withdrawing the American troops from Afghanistan. The fact that he fired his Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, is very significant in terms of the political messaging that he wants to send across. And if he does do what he said he was going to do, which is to bring US troops or a large part of US troops from Afghanistan back home before Christmas, this is obviously a decision that will be very difficult to reverse for a Biden administration. So I would say the number one concern is truly about what he's going to do vis-a-vis Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, and to all of you. We have more questions. You can also, if you have time, Richard and Christian, it's also possible sometimes to type in your response if you wish, so in the Q&A. Because I'm selecting a few, and it's interesting your comment, Alexandra, because many were wondering where do you think Biden will go on his first foreign trip? So that was also quite interesting. And another one asked who Biden should call in Europe. That's a traditional question. But just to turn to new topics maybe we haven't tackled yet. There is a question on US and China. So what role will EU play in the increasingly fierce strategic competition between the US and China? Will EU join the US in a closer alliance against China under the Biden administration? There is also a question from my colleague Françoise Bouchek. She asked, how do panelists view the future of US-European foreign and defense cooperation with NATO? We have a little bit touched upon it, but she specifies, which includes 2 key non-EU members, the UK and Turkey. And this given Macron's description of NATO as brain dead and the angry response of Turkish President Erdogan to Macron's recent speech on Islamist extremism, so in a tense context. And finally, because also, Alexandra, you touched upon a little bit also Germany, I think. There is an interesting question, which is as follows. Will the approach of the US towards Germany search for reconciliation or preserve some foreign policy elements of the Trump administration when it came to removing the troops and the Nord Stream 2? So, and I see more questions are coming in, but we have already quite a few. Who would like to take the floor, maybe on US and China? Alexandra, would you like to take this one, maybe?
Sure. Very quickly, I would basically, summarize what I would call the sort of renegotiation of the transatlantic partnership with China at the center. Let me just clarify that. It means that what we are seeing, we've seen that with Trump, but you see that definitely in the Biden foreign policy advisory team, is that what the message coming from Washington is that obviously, and this is linked to the NATO question, there is a willingness to reinvest politically, diplomatically within the NATO alliance. But in exchange, Washington will increasingly ask Europeans to align with Washington's policy vis-à-vis China, be it on the screening of Chinese investments in Europe, or be it on the exportation of critical technologies to China. So I would say that the heart of what we are discussing, which is the future of the transatlantic relationship under a Biden administration, is profoundly linked to the Chinese question. And it's interesting also to see how Washington is pushing the China item more and more on the NATO agenda, how China is being increasingly discussed within NATO circles, which was not the case before. It was rather much more about discussing Russia. So that to me is a way of linking both the China issue and the transatlantic partnership issue. We have to keep that in mind, that they're both intrinsically linked, and this will increase as a way of pressuring Europeans to continuously align with the US assertive policies towards China, and I would say mostly on the technological Huawei 5G issue.
Thank you. Christian or Richard, do you have any thoughts on or reaction? I see Christian, maybe. Would you like to react?
I can say a word about Germany if it's time to do that. Yes? All right. Well, I think, Berlin, of course, never stopped to have dialogue with the United States for obvious reasons, even if Mr. Trump was was tough with Madame Merkel a couple of times, but he was tough with every European leaders. How tough he was with Theresa May, for instance, is absolutely terrible. But it does not mean that the diplomacy has cut the relationships. And probably, of course, it will remain, as Alexandra said, a strong bilateral relationship. I'm not sure it's a special relationship, because Alexandra, if you have several relationships, then you don't have any special relationship anymore, right? It was not the idea of the special relationship. But on Nord Stream, what I have heard recently in Berlin is that what is expected in Berlin is that we will not have more support coming from the United States on this file, but the United States will probably be less vocal on the project. When Trump was very tough, you can find online interviews where he's really denouncing Nord Stream as a strong difficulty with Germany. And then you have the question also of who is coming power after the elections of September 2021, if those elections take place at this date because of the sanitary situation. If it is a Schwarz-Grün coalition, as we say very often, I mean a coalition between the CDU-CSU on one side and the Green Party on the other side, it could be a good deal for everybody, because you could have a good balance between the classic transatlantic view of security, CDU-CSU, and a more EU active orientation for the Green. So if we have this kind of coalition after the election, I think it's not bad at all for the German position in foreign policy in the future.
Thank you very much. Richard, do you have a final comment maybe on China or any other? Otherwise, I have a last round of questions and we will stop.
Okay, I'll just make 2 quick points. So just, I think very quickly on China, I think bringing the UK perspective into this, I think that the UK government probably views China, and particularly this sort of notion of the creation of this D10, 10 democracies, and the Hong Kong situation, as a way in which I think the UK government wants to reset how people view its foreign policy approach, and use the Biden presidency as an opportunity for that reset. I think we'll also see that in the UK's chairing the UN Security Council. I think we'll see that also with the UK hosting the climate gathering later this year. And then just on the question about the first visit, so before Trump, the 5 previous presidents before Trump, all of them made their first visit to either Canada or Mexico. Trump made his first visit to Saudi Arabia and Israel. Before the last time that a US president made his first visit to the UK was Jimmy Carter, but Obama made a second visit to the UK. I think that if Biden wants to signal a return to an older order, I would expect a Canada or Mexico trip to be fairly high up on the agenda. But I think it would be very interesting if his first European trip is not to the UK, but is to Germany. I think that would be very significant.
Okay, thank you very much. I will direct one question to each of you and ask you also to have maybe a concluding statement or concluding thoughts, because I think we have now taken about 3 rounds of questions, and of course feel free to answer those questions we couldn't do orally. So I have, I think I would direct, and I hope your expertise will allow you to answer, but there was an interesting question on for Alexandra, I think, which is, sorry, just going through the chat, which is on Iran. And could the US, which has rejoined the deal with Iran, cooperate with the EU to attract Tehran away from deeper alliance with China and Russia? So that was, if you feel comfortable answering that question, then precisely I thought actually that the question maybe on EU-Russia relations could go to Christian. What impact could the Biden presidency have on EU-Russia relations? And finally, maybe for Richard, a last question had to do more with domestic politics. And my colleague Sabina Pakaris says, considering the close electoral victory and Biden claiming to be a reconciliating president, do you expect him to apply policies or to moves that are more oriented at keeping Trump supporters engaged than being a reflection of his own actual viewpoints, especially as a president inheriting a post-COVID economy? So how basically to practically organize reconciliation at home? This time, I guess I will go back to Alexandra first, Christian, Richard. And if you have one final point as well on the overall discussion, maybe something we have missed or just a conclusion, please go ahead. Alexandra, the floor is yours.
Sure. On Iran, I mean, that's the obvious, I would say, foreign policy dossier where Biden will restore transatlantic dialogue. That's the number one priority. Then in terms of rejoining the JCPOA, I'm not at all convinced that this will actually happen. There is a willingness also to renegotiate the terms of this nuclear agreement, which is pretty much in line with what France has been proposing these last 3 years as well. So we'll find a certain amount of, I would say, common ground between the EU and the US on Iran. Then can it attract Tehran away from deeper alliance with China and Russia? Of course not. I mean, as I said at the beginning, the world has drastically changed these last couple of years. Alliances have formed between different players. China has a very long-term, very regional approach to the Middle East and has fully understood how critical it is to deepen its ties with Iran. Russia has the same kind of approach. So these alliances will be very difficult to reverse. And that would basically be my conclusion, is that Biden, you know, his rhetoric, his political speech is to restore US leadership. But this restoration of US leadership takes place in a world that is much less willing to actually accept it after 4 years of Trump. US leadership has become increasingly contested. And so he will have to first and foremost rebuild trust with the United States' traditional allies.
Thank you very much. Christian, on Russia and the future of EU-Russia relations within the context of a Biden administration.
Well, I don't think the election of Biden is going to change a lot in the relations between the EU and Russia. We are confronted for decades now to the same kind of dilemma. On one side, Russia is the neighbor of the EU, and we have to cooperate. We have to cooperate on many policies. And on the other side, we know that we have limits on what we can do because we don't share the same democratic values, and this dilemma, of course, will remain, and it has an impact, of course, on the policy we can have vis-a-vis the countries which are between Russia and the EU. We had a very good example on Sunday with the election in Moldova, and here the EU can be happy because Maya Sandu, who is the lady representing the pro-EU views, won on Igor Dodon, the candidate and the president supported by Russia. Can I just say one last word? I think, as we said, populism is has never been the monopoly of the United States, and the elections which took place shall give a lot of encouragement to well, some democratic opposition in Europe to populist government, and I'm thinking in particular to Poland, because this country is a country which had a huge ambition before peace came back to power for the EU. And the American election showed to the Polish people that well, this populist government can be a fight through legal means, and it should be an encouragement for all those who believe in democracy and liberal values in Poland, because again I think EU needs definitely this country.
Thank you very much, Christian. I'm moving to Richard for final reaction on domestic ability of Biden. You have already highlighted a few constraints he has, but on reconciliation and maybe a general conclusion. Thank you.
Great, thank you, and a very good question from Sabina. I think Biden ran as a reconciliatory candidate. He said in the debate against Donald Trump, "I'm not Bernie Sanders." He's pitched himself much more to the middle, and in some ways losing the Senate, if he can't win control of the Senate in the special elections in January, gives him an opportunity to appoint a cabinet that is more conciliatory. There won't be, there's a plausible pretense for why he won't have Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders in his administration. It means that he'll probably appoint someone like Chris Coons, the Delaware senator, as Secretary of State, or someone with giving him a high-profile foreign policy role. I think, though, if Biden thinks that he's going to be able to craft bipartisan legislation through a kind of conciliatory approach to Republicans, I think he will be mistaken. The Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, has already vowed to be the Grim Reaper of any Democratic legislation. And so it seems to me, even the COVID stimulus could be very difficult for him to get through. He might get it through, but I think beyond that, I think it'll be very challenging for him. And so what I think we'll see is a continuation of a trend which is sometimes called executive-centered partisanship in the US system, where Biden will have to govern through the White House, through his head as the executive branch, and that could be quite tricky for him because he'll be pulled in two directions. The left of the Democratic Party will want him to use his executive powers to be bold, but I think that his instinct will be to be more restrained, and that could cause some internal party difficulties for him moving forward. So I think I'll just finish by saying thank you for inviting me onto this panel. It's been a really high quality conversation with my two great panelists, and thank you, Sarah, for chairing it so well.
Yes, thank you very much to all of you, to the audience, for having sent really interesting questions covering, I think, the whole array of geopolitics and domestic politics. I thank, of course, Richard, Alexandra, Christian for their time and ability to answer very well these questions. We have also a lot of congratulations in the chat about your excellent presentations. I just want to highlight as well on the Irish dimension and the fact that Biden says I'm Irish. We have published a paper as well with Next UK on this dimension and the implication it could have for the future of EU-UK relations. Yes, I think I'm closing this event. Thank you to all, and there will be a possibility to watch again this debate online if you all agree to have the presentation or the webinar uploaded on our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you.